Ganya pursed her lips and waited a few moments after Tom left her office before sitting down next to Mivere and picking up her drink. Well, that sounds like it was mostly harmless. Mostly harmless? Ganya! Mivere was usually one of her more reserved friends, and in her heart, she knew that the academy would be in good hands when she passed on her job as head administrator, as long as everything went according to plan. Just now, Miv was looking at her incredulously, at a loss for words. Taken as a whole, if everything he said was true, she tried to get him drunk, and not just her co-wife, and her other daughter too. If he had signed that book deal, then all right. I was talking about the interview. It airs at the end of the week, so we'll see what we see. I didn't mean the shell, though I will have a few things to say about that, believe me. Ganya held up a placating hand. No, I'm going to have a few choice words with her about that whole business. Believe me. That book would have reflected very poorly on Professor Warwick, and by extension on the Academy. And on you. I'm certainly not having that sort of thing. Lady Richet has just gone too far. Mivere slowly deflated back into the chair, as Ganya watched her digest that. While she never spoken of her intentions that Miv follow in her footsteps as head administrator, she was still aware of the damage that could have been done to her academic reputation had things gone badly. That was encouraging, at least. It paid to not entirely lose sight of your own interests, even when it seemed like all your time was spent on other matters. It could have been a disaster, Ganya. Miv looked at her wretchedly. Could have been, but wasn't. Neither was this bikini team business, no matter what Professor Duvari seems to think. She sighed and took a sip from her drink. Though they're going to have to come up with at least one structured activity a semester. Ganya, you aren't serious. Mivere paused, utterly sidetracked for the moment. A bikini team? When did that even happen? Exactly 1 second after Ms. Duvari put her fists on my desk and demanded I do something about it, Ganya said flatly, glowering at the offending spot on her desk for a moment. The purpose of any club chartered at the Academy is to provide a socially structured activity that promotes social bonds. They can clean the beach once a quarter, wash cars, or whatever ridiculous thing comes to mind. One of them is a chug, sir, isn't she? I'll probably have marketing proposals by the end of the week. She's busy with costumes for the show, Mivere snorted, but looked a bit less distraught as she stared at her drink. Give it 2 weeks. You're worrying about a problem that didn't happen. My job? I worry about the things that might happen and are happening. I have no time for didn't. Just today, I had Duvari in my office for half an hour over those swimming costumes. I expect you can tell me quite a bit more about how that happened. Ganya smiled as seeing Miv shake herself out of it. For her own part, at least she'd kept the irony out of her voice, calling the agent Professor. Credit where credit was due, though. Duvari apparently had a certain severe flair for teaching, and the swimming team was coming along nicely. Regardless, she'd learned where her limits were that morning. It had been satisfying. I also had Professor Burgress suddenly requesting family leave for her first grandson, and there's no substitute available. Then there was going over expense reports for next quarter, and I still have the student council wanting to brief me on the fall show. Have you ever been treated to an afternoon with finance when they want to go into expenses? Now that's a disaster. It took me 20 minutes to ease them past that couch you claimed. You're welcome, by the way. He could have walked right into that, though, Miv muttered stubbornly, as she fidgeted with her glass. He was right there with them, and he did it for your student, Nestha, who is off the hook with her family from what you've given me to understand. She showed where her loyalties are as well. Trust me, I'd be a lot happier dealing with young Nesta than I am with her mothers, Ganya said pointedly, before giving Miv a long look. So, how are you and Professor Warwick doing? We're all right. I wore that bikini down to the pool when I heard the other girls were going to be doing it. Honestly, he isn't responsible for that, but still. Shaking her head woefully, she sighed. I just don't think he really understands how safe the campus is. He goes off cooking at the human food restaurant once a week, where he's at least around the other males in the kitchen and the girls from our class keep an eye on him. But other times? I'm sorry, but being out with the Rochers? That was exactly what I didn't want to happen. When he told me he was doing it to help Nesta, I didn't know what to say. But how are you two doing, really? Ganya peered at her pointedly. Personal wasn't the same thing as important, and while she had faith Miv would get there, sometimes personal took a bit of time. I love him, and yet sometimes I just want to throttle him. He's supposed to go out on a date with Shalea this coming Shell, and you know he still won't go shopping for a suit? She huffed. Honestly, sometimes it's just like dealing with a woman. He is a human, Ganya said, noting the obvious without any sympathy. Settling back into the chair comfortably, she smiled. And don't think changing the subject lets you off the hook. I want to meet your co-wife, and it's far past time that I did. Honestly, you could have come to me years ago. Ganya, you know how some people are about things like that. Miv looked at her pensively. I'm glad you don't care, but if someone like Professor... Ganya, did you say Professor Burgress doesn't have a substitute available? Well, yes. One of her daughters is due, and they just found out it's a boy. She's dropping everything to be there for a whole week, and we have no one to teach marriage fundamentals for noble houses. Ganya rolled her eyes before sipping her juice, and momentarily wished for something stronger. Goddess, help me. I may have to do it. Oh, you do have someone? Mavere quirked a smile. Peli Saheth ran another check on the head administrator's schedule and nodded to the girls from the student council. 3 of them were already in the office and waiting patiently, but they were early. That was always nice, but the head administrator still had some empty time yet. She liked it when Mavere visited. She always cheered Lady Sasano up, and the lady had often confided that she hoped Mavere would follow in her position. Goddess, where did the time go? It seemed like yesterday when Lady Sasano assumed the job from Lady Melchier. Now when Lady Sasano grew close to retiring, Penny knew it would be time for her to start training her own replacement. Penny smiled softly as she heard peals of laughter from the other side of the head administrator's door. Whatever they were discussing, it must be quite amusing. Tom let out a long sigh as he sat in the biology classroom and stared at Desala Sahar's paper on benevolent assimilation. In essence, the girl had compared 2 wars between the US and Spain, and the US and the Philippines to a matter of breast size. She then gone on to do the exact same thing, comparing the imperial acquisition of Earth to US policy, and come down firmly on the side of the latter, and using breast size again. Essentially, she compared Earth's history to a ritual dick-beating contest. It was acidic, but it was also clever. And like it or not, she wasn't entirely wrong. As he thought about Mavere, he didn't expect a lot of traction on the whole issue of breast size, either. God love her, or goddess, probably. The goddess had been fairly kind to his lady. Tom grimaced as he marked the paper with the equivalent of an A-, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. It was a shame. Desala was a bright girl, but she was also an unrepentant bitch. Maybe she and Nessa had been switched at birth. That made him snort, and he looked over as his omnipad pinged for his attention. He picked it up and looked at the text. It was from Ganya. Professor Warwick, I am sorry to intrude on your club time, but I need to ask you to stand in as a substitute professor for Professor Bolgras's seminar. She requires immediate family leave, and you are the only one available. You will be needed for 2 days during the times below. Tom looked down at the times and dates, which generally ran through his chess class, which was still empty. Well, it was part of the job. Certainly, Head Administrator. I have the time, but I don't know the subject, and I don't have any material prepared. That won't be an issue. Please meet with Professor Tanada Bougrez. Her entire seminar is written out, and you only need to read to the class. Thank you very much for your time, as this is very important to her family. That was that, then. I will get with her at once. What is the name of the seminar? Marriage Fundamentals for Noble Houses. Thank you again, Professor. Her contact information is below. Tom looked at the title and shrugged. He could call the woman up after he finished grading the last 2 papers. He opened up Kaslin's because he liked to save the twins for last. It was interesting to see the similarities and the differences, and he settled in to read the opening with anticipation. He paused. Swiping the paper aside, he pulled up the Academy syllabus and scrolled down. After a minute or so, he found the entry under the listing for seminars. It was one of the mandatory ones required for first-year girls, and they cycled through it by assignment, with a new class every few weeks. Roughly 750 first-year girls, divided up by the months of the Longshill year. Give or take a few, it worked out to an average of 90 girls filtering through each seminar. That made him gulp despite himself, but if it was just reading pre-prepared material, how hard could it really be? He shifted in the chair, and pulled up the byline for Marriage Fundamentals for Noble Houses, and started to read. She can't be serious. I do love when you make pasta. Mavere smiled pleasantly, as Tom set out the plate. It's one of my favourites. It's easy to make, once you get the sauce right. I should probably teach it to Burdin, but he's still wanting to experiment with bacon. Tom sighed heavily as he sat down and watched Mavere tuck in. Anyway, this seminar, it's sex ed, Miv. What in the world am I going to teach these girls about sex education? Mavere made a small, strangled cough, and reached for her drink. Sorry, a bit of sauce went down the wrong way. She took a long swallow and patted her chest a moment, then smiled. Really, Tom, you're just being melodramatic. I know it's a lot of girls, but this isn't a class for using your Socratic method. All you have to do is read from the book and maybe answer a few questions at the end. It won't be any problem at all. I suppose, he said, shaking out the napkin over his lap. Is there anything I should know about Tanada Burgress? She's fairly conservative, but she cares a great deal about the students. Miv set her fork aside and picked at a bit of the bread, thoughtfully. She's been teaching at the academy long before I got here. I think she's the oldest person on the staff besides Jama. And she's been teaching that seminar for as long as I can remember. When are you meeting her? Tomorrow. Good afternoon, Professor Warwick. Although she'd been surreptitiously polite over the omnipad, Tanada Burgress looked at him a bit uncertainly. I want to thank you for taking my seminar. It means so very much for me to be there for my first grandson. My daughter, Calais. She's my youngest, and the others all had girls. Everyone is quite thrilled. I can imagine, Tom smiled easily. Professor Burgress wasn't ancient, but middle age had definitely come and gone. If her youngest was having a son, it didn't seem like a reach to imagine it was probably the last child her daughters would have. Great-grandchildren looked far more likely. My congratulations to your family. Thank you, she smiled. Now, won't you sit down? Before I go, I want to give you a quick briefing on the lessons. Tom nodded amiably and took the seat in her office and looked at her expectantly. Now, I don't use an Omnipad, only this old lesson book of mine. You're going to be starting with the introductory day tomorrow, and the lesson after that on the importance of moral codes, she said, slipping a bookmark in at each page. Now, if you get to the end of the second day, it's very important to get all the way to the end of the lesson. Check your time, because it's about the implications of physical proximity by your third date. And I wouldn't like to leave that section hanging in the middle. It gives girls the wrong idea. She slipped a purple bookmark in and looked up at him expectantly. If you don't think you have the time, then it's better not to start that part at all unless you have at least 10 minutes. 10 whole minutes? Tom struggled for something to say. It all sounds very relevant. I'll look forward to reading it. My word, yes, she said, flipping the folio closed with satisfaction. That's really all you should have the time for. So, that's it? I just read to the class? Oh, yes. I spent a good many years accumulating all of this. She smiled and rested a hand on top of the thick folder. I really should put it on an Omnipad for when I retire, but it's been such a task. Accumulating all of it over the years, putting it together for the girls, and I really do just prefer reading something off a hard copy instead of the Omnipad. I just don't think there's any better way of getting the information across. Now then, Professor Warwick, I'll leave this with you, and pick it up when I get back from my leave, after Shell. Begress stood up and gave him a kindly smile. Now, don't worry. I know that filling in can always be a bit difficult. You just stick with the material, and I'm sure you won't have any problems. Tom kept his gaze averted from the auditorium full of girls and continued reading. Somehow, some way, he had to be paying off karma from a past life. There was no way he screwed up badly enough in this one. This brings us to the other side of the matter. Why do people marry? There are countless millions of happily married families throughout the Empire today, and they didn't get married only because it is the customary thing to do. Consider all the facts. Fewer married people go to jail than single people. He stared at the next line, and his brain rebelled. Just read it. Don't think about it. Pardon me. Fewer married people go crazy. He looked down at the clock on the podium. He stopped being able to look at the girl some time ago. Also, by marrying, a woman becomes a better employment risk outside her house. Married women are regarded as more steady, and shows a woman is ready to assume wholesome responsibilities. Psychiatrists agree that, apart from exceptional cases, men who live alone will become neurotic and frustrated. It is an abnormal state for a man, and they will overcome this only by setting out intelligently to seek enrichment in life. Life is also more comfortable if you are a married woman, as it provides you with home cooking in her own home, and someone to keep her socks in order. He had to bite his tongue hard and looked at the clock. 2 more minutes. Finally, marriage offers a legal and socially approved way to achieve sexual satisfaction. Women and men can receive relief from their bodily tensions without the terrible feelings of guilt, anxiety, and remorse that often accompany unmarried intercourse. While modern science recognizes that sexual satisfaction is far more than a product of reproducing one's kind, it is also a satisfying activity and releases many nervous tensions, as well as tensions brought on by hormonal needs. During the rest of this seminar, we will focus on why marriage is an important move to consider for yourself and your house. In closing, before questions, we want you to consider these 12 steps to finding a man. He stared. Digging his thumbnail into his hand helped. Take note and always help a man when their vehicle breaks down. Look at census reports and live or get stationed where there are more single men. Read the obituaries and take note of son widowers your age. Pay close attention to men working as secretaries or nurses. Sit on a park bench and feed the animals. Take a class at a cooking school. Get a cute pet and walk it in the parks where men like to be with children. Ask any married friends where the eligible men are. Be nice to everybody as they may have a eligible brother or son. Prove you'll provide. Make a lot of money. Pay special attention to men carrying a hat box. And number 12. Don't be afraid to hang out with more attractive girls as they may have some leftovers. Tom closed the booklet and strangled down the hysterical laughter that was screaming to be let out. He stared at the clock. Are there any questions from the class? He said. They managed to look up at the audience. As luck would have it, there were 103 girls in this month's class, as fall break prevented one the following month. He gazed up into a sea of blushing faces. Belda and Prasala were there at least, and he wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Both of the girls looked more transfixed than when he'd first met them. And the other girls... He had to be paying off heavy karma. At least one murder, maybe. Anyone? Tom looked around at the sea of faces and nodded as one girl raised her hand tentatively. Yes, miss. Prindre Savare, she said, standing up. It seemed to be the custom in most of the larger classes, and Tom nodded and tried not to notice if she was trembling. He wasn't sure if he wasn't trembling himself. Professor, that is, we were wondering, what are humans like? In marriage. I mean, what are humans like in marriage? An excited murmur swept the auditorium, the girls looking to one another, as Prindra smiled expectantly. Glancing up in the third row, Prasala was sitting bolt upright, while Belda looked like she was trying to slowly sink into her chair. Pindre grinned again and canted her head, to show she was curious. Joy. Human marriage. He tried to gather his thoughts. That is, I suppose you know that humans tend to be monogamous. Until recently, that was pretty much all there was. One man and one woman in a marriage. Though that's changing a bit now. He thought about it a bit. I do think it's important to focus on family planning. It's not always easy when you're getting started. My first wife and I... Wait, Professor? You said you only had one wife. Pindre looked like she was trying to process something, frowning furiously. Oh. Well, yes. Tom sighed and shrugged slightly. It wasn't a happy memory for him. It had been a long time ago, but it was a lesson learned. Family planning was important. My first wife and I met in my university days, and we were married right after. I kind of struggled with my career because I was training as a pilot, and two of the big airlines went under, and hers took off in a different direction. It made money a real problem for a while too, and we ended up getting divorced. A susurrus of whispers washed through the girls like a wave. You were divorced, sir? Pindre looked aghast, darkening past cobalt into deep indigo, as she struggled with the question. From the look of things, she wasn't alone. I mean, I've heard that can happen with humans, but didn't your mother step in to help? What about your houses? That's not such a big thing. That is to say, young people would get some help from their families when they needed it, but generally speaking, We were expected to make our own way in life.
But that's what poor people do, or outcasts. No one from a good family would do that to a boy.
Pindre was looking at him incredulously, and he felt a bit ashamed. It wasn't a great memory. There had been the fights, the regrets, the sorrow. He'd received the divorce paperwork in his last 4 weeks of OTS, just before Christmas. It had been bad all the way around, but he hadn't felt so ashamed in years, and certainly not after he'd been remarried. None of which mattered just now, as he saw the hole he was digging for himself. The thing is, I didn't come from a noble house. That is, I did, but that was a long time ago, and the history is a little spotty. Tom thought back over his family tree, trying to find something.
Oh.
Pindre bit her lip and seemed to twist a bit as she stood there, looking at him uncertainly.
I'm sorry, Professor. More than one noble house has fallen on hard times. It's no real disgrace to the children. I mean, everybody has heard about somebody. Sort of. I mean, I'm sorry. It's nothing for you to be embarrassed about.
I'm not embarrassed, he said flatly, looking at a few of the girls in the front row. There was a sea of polite disbelief, and he wasn't sure for a moment if he was better off in the hole or not. He stopped just short of telling them that was hundreds of years in his family's past, and humans didn't have noble houses the way Shorvanti did, which he realized might sound even worse. Even so. No, really. Look, family planning is important, and I wish that I thought it through the first time. Just so you all know, I was very happily married after that.
So, you're married?
One of the girls in the first row blurted out the question, then quickly stood up when he looked at her.
Hilary Grimmain, Professor. That is, you're married now?
No, Miss Hilary. My wife and my daughter were killed. He tried not to sigh as he looked at her. She had a full face that was almost heart-shaped, and despite the school blacks, she wore a bright topaz pin and had a purse down at her feet. It had flowers on it. His gaze lingered on her for a moment. Hilary's face had clouded over, and he could feel the awkward apology coming. It wasn't her fault, and she was just a child at the time. My family was killed in an accident. I'm currently single, though I am seeing someone.
Oh, we all guessed that you must be, sir.
Her face brightened like the sun coming out when he added that last part. It was something of a relief, but in spite of himself he canted his head. It was catching. Why is that exactly, Miss Hilary?
My mothers say that you can always tell. I mean, you just have to be looking, she said brightly. Everyone knows men who are hunting for a relationship take jobs in places where there are a lot of women working.
That's not why I'm teaching here, Miss Hilary. He tried to process that one. First the interview, now this. I'm here in a professional capacity, representing my species. I mean, it's not like I'm the only human dating a Shorvanti. Movement caught his eye, and he glanced up to see Belda, who was violently shaking her head in rapid little twitches, and seemed ready to disappear through the floor. No help there. But yes, I am seeing a Shorvanti woman. At least 20 more hands immediately shot up, and he absently nodded at the one in the fourth row. Yes, miss?
Rehir and Lathre, Professor.
She stood up and looked at the couple of the other girls around her quickly, who whispered and nodded.
That is, well, can you tell us who she is? And are you making sure to wear something she gave you?
Hands shot up across the hall.
No, Kamara, I didn't hear about Professor Warwick yesterday.
Jacksme sighed miserably as the two girls walked back to the dorm.
No more than a dozen times. By the end of breakfast. All of the girls who aren't in our class want to know things all over again, and no, that's not going to cheer me up. You really can't blame them for being extra curious, Mara said philosophically, shrugging a little bit as she shouldered in under the umbrella. You said it would be here the week before last, and they're getting nervous.
Nervous?
Those girls were acting like they want to tie me in chains and throw me in the bay.
Jacksmy didn't want to whine, but she'd already hocked her entire graduation fund with her mother's, just to make this happen. It wasn't like she could admit that, but still.
Interstellar shipping isn't an exact science, you know, right? I mean, it can be with a modern world, but this is Earth we're talking about. It's not like there couldn't be delays. I know you do your best, but they don't know you like I do, Mara said quietly. Maybe it would be better if you just tell them it isn't coming, and start work on what you have. It's not like your designs aren't brilliant, it's just that you could probably look at doing them, maybe a bit plainer. I'm sure no one will hold it against you.
There it was again. Jax could hear it in Kamara's voice. She was trying to be solicitous after all the nasty remarks in the council meeting, but it was still there all the same. House Chelksa had failed to deliver, and they were running out of time. Mara gave her a compassionate smile before continuing.
I mean, not really. I know I won't, and Melandi said the very same thing to me just the other day. It's still going to be a great show. I expect everyone will be so happy to do it that they won't even remember afterward.
Jacksmy wanted to wash away with the rain. Mivere drew Tom closer to her on the couch, wrapping her arm around him, as they watched one of his favourite movies. It was something in black and white, and she'd enjoyed it the first time. Right now, her mind wasn't on it very much, but she hoped it would have cheered him up more. Honestly, she'd never seen him in as much of a funk, and now it was into the second day. As the credits on the film started to roll at the end, he scrunched down against her. Miv? Leaning over and resting her head gently against his, she watched him turn off the video screen and waited for him to say something. Miv, I'm wondering. I had that seminar and it was different. Half the time I wanted to gag, and the other half I was on the verge of nervous laughter. I mean, I know that's out of touch, isn't it? It wasn't a question, but it came out like one. I just wanted to ask, by your standards, am I a bad boyfriend?
What?
Mivere blinked in surprise.
Dear heart, I love you. Why would you even ask something like that?
Tom sighed. It wasn't the seminar, it was the questions they asked. Like, do I wear something you give me every day? I mean, yes, I wear the academy suit you got me on Earth. And you know how much that means to me. And you wore the bikini, which I'm kind of thinking isn't nearly as good in kind now. And,
Tom, just stop. You met Tanada Burgress.
Miv closed her eyes. She'd hoped for something, but not this.
She's been teaching the same material for the last 30 years. And yes, it's hopelessly out of date. She wouldn't in the least bit approve of Shalea and I if she had any idea. But you're a great boyfriend. There are a few things I'd like you to do, sure, but you're kind. You care. I could have throttled you over what you did for Nesta, but it's why you did it that matters. You talk with me. You listen. You might not have gotten me a lot of gifts, but you wrapped up your whole world and made it a gift to me. That night out at the theatre? The trips to all the universities?
That was all a part of my job, though. He was looking down and slouched against her. All of that sort of thing is why you hired me to begin with.
The kimono wasn't. You arranged all of that, and it's the nicest gift I've ever had. It's not something you can wear. I'm going to wear it for the fall show, with you.
She hugged him, and felt him relax a bit into her.
It's not that I won't wear it. We just haven't had the occasion yet. That's different.
I'm glad you like it, he mumbled. And she jostled him into her a bit more.
I absolutely love it, she said firmly,
then added a bit guiltily, desperately blanking Ganya's questions from her mind for a moment.
And the bikini is nice too. It's not nearly so bad when other people are around wearing one.
But there are a few things you'd like me to do, he said after a moment.
Not many.
She hugged him again, and met his eyes as he moved back and looked at her.
I'd really like it if you'd set something up with Shalea. Something firm? Sholvanti don't make plans for a date on a whim. She's asked you with more than 2 days' notice, the way that she should do, and you haven't set anything up yet. She's worried. Things like that matter.
Tom was walking along the commons and waiting for Mavere. He'd had a lot to think about since their conversation the night before, but at least he'd messaged Shalea back and set something firm in place for the shell. He wasn't sure what they'd do, but at least Shalea, or Leah as Miv often called her, had followed up to ask him what sort of things he liked. It wasn't exactly the kind of question he could field. Shill wasn't his home turf, and Miv told him that bringing her back to watch a movie was out. He had no intention of taking her out to a bar, not even to pay a visit to Dacro again, and he had no idea where anything was, what there was to do, or what would appeal to him on Shill. It sucked living like a tourist. Well, this was home now. He still didn't know where anything was off of the campus, and the idea of taking her sightseeing to things she'd probably seen all her life seemed dull. A thought came to him, and he worked his way across the commons hopefully. It was with a profound sense of relief when he spotted Jama Hamares, not far from the bench he'd seen him on the week before, and he picked up his pace. "Jama, how are you?"
"Lad, you're looking well."
The elderly Sholvanti man smiled broadly and patted the seat beside him.
"I'd heard from Garner your shell was more than a wee bit interesting. I've been just waiting to catch up with you and get all the details firsthand, though."
I'm meeting Mavere in a bit, but I'll come by your office later." Settling into the seat and checking his watch, he looked back. "There's a couple of things I wanted to ask without her around, if you have the time."
"What is it, then? You and she seem to be getting on. I heard you made quite a splash with the Marriage Fundamentals seminar."
He gave a rich chuckle and leaned in.
"I think it's fair to say your secret is out."
"Yeah, the seminar," Tom deflated. "That's been a real treat."
"What do you mean?
Are you kidding me? I had to stand there and read material for 45 minutes. And what I was reading?" He shook his head. There was still a lingering sense of disbelief that only being on an alien world could account for, in the absence of Rod Sterling. "I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was insane. Do you know she teaches these girls to meet men by sitting around on park benches? I mean, just like we are here?"
"Aye. Rule number 5, Jama nodded.
"What?"
"Rule number 5. You don't think I've been sitting on these damned hard benches just to feed the bloody Preltha, do you?" he said again, a bit more gruffly. "I told you about young Akime Zarin over in the science department. Well, now she works with Professor Lloyd Train, who's doing quantum fluctuation theory. I've had my eye on her for the last few weeks. She's a bit young, but you should see the way she—"
"Jama, not helping," Tom exclaimed. Then hushed his voice as several women looked over and whispered, "Anyway, I thought you were all over that."
"I'm old, lad, not dead. A fine woman doesn't get less appealing with age. You just learn the rules and play the game better."
Jama looked at him sharply. "Anyway, what has your Dax in a twist exactly?" Well, 2 things. I'm a bit worried about my date with Miv's co-wife, Shalea, but mostly is that seminar."
"What's wrong with Tanada's seminar, then?"
"Wrong? Jama, that advice went out of style 100 years ago in my world. I can barely say it with a straight face." Tom spread his hands, not quite sure how to say it. "Even Mavere says the information is out of date. I mean, this isn't Earth, but I've seen my share of Sholvanti. About 1 in 5 of those girls looked like they wanted to eat me alive." He nodded. "You know when you get the rest of that brown out of your hair and turn a decent silver, you're going to do quite well?"
"Jama."
Tom closed his eyes for a moment and breathed. "Look, the ones who looked like they were after me were fine, once I stopped looking up. It was the ones asking who I'm dating that were the problem." When they weren't prying at who I'm seeing, they were asking how I'm being dated and other things. And there's nothing wrong with brown hair. At least you got a curious bunch, Jabba chuckled, and brushed his hands dismissively. Listen now, Tanada Burgress has been teaching here for 2 years longer than I have, and that's a bloody long time. I'll have you know she started that class. It was a tough stand at the time, and she fought hard for it. Everyone else thought planning for a match was something mothers, and only mothers, should be involved in. Now, maybe her seminar is getting a bit dated, but none of us is getting any younger, and her heart has always been in the right place. Jummer waited a bit as he digested that before carrying on. As for the girls, whatever they're asking, there have to be some things in common between Shorvanti and humans. If there weren't, you wouldn't be getting on so famously with young Mithair, would you? Why not focus on that? I suppose so. Tom started mulling the idea over in his mind. That's the spirit. Now, tell me about this Shalea girl. Jaxmi lay on her bed and stared at the ceiling when the knock came on her door. She sighed before rolling her head towards the door. Yes? Jax, is Melondi. Let me in? Jaxmi closed her eyes for a moment. Her reputation was crashing around her, and her next 3 years would be a smouldering heap of rubble. Couldn't anyone just let her social life die in peace? Fine, come in, she grumbled. Kamara, Kazin, you? Melondi burst into the room and shut the door behind her. In spite of herself, Jaxmi sat up. The girl looked flushed and backed against the door, as if a legion were going to try and break it down. All right, what is it? So, I started watching one of the videos, for movie night, to see what might be good. Uh-huh. So, I started one, and it was soldiers, humans, in combat, against spacecraft. There were people in purple armor. Melondi lowered her voice and whispered, It looks like battle footage. I'm worried it might be treasonous. Mel, just calm down. Have a seat, and let's have a look at it. Jaxmi looked at her friend, and then sighed again. Look, everything he has was musicals or movies. What's it called? Mel looked at her omnipad like it was going to bite her, but pulled up the title. Firefly. Right, look, sit down and let's have a look at this thing. If it has a title and everything, then it's probably just fiction. Jaxmi rolled onto the side of the bed and sat up. Were they singing? There was another knock at the door. Jaxmi rubbed her forehead and counted to 12. Yes? The door opened, slowly, as an older shill woman poked her head inside. Jaxmi sat up straighter as she looked at the woman, who was wearing academy coveralls. It was unusual for anyone but the custodial staff to be in the dorms. For one of the academy stewards, it was practically unheard of. She felt embarrassed at her greeting and belatedly stood up. Excuse me, please forgive my manners. Melondi clutched her omnipad tightly against her chest, but stood up beside her. Are you Jaxmi Chalksa, miss? The woman looked between her and Melondi in uncertainty. This is my room. Jaxmi stepped forward, offering her fist. How can I help you? Actually, miss, it would be a good deal of help if you could sign for this. The steward bumped fists before offering over her omnipad. We have a cargo container that arrived for you about an hour ago, and the hauling company says it's signature only. We need you to sign before they can unload it from the transport down on Dock 2. Thank you, ma'am. Heart thundering in her chest, Jaxmi took her omnipad and let the steward swipe the displayed file over to her pad, before signing it and swiping a copy back. Her hands were shaking as she set the tablet on the table. I appreciate you bringing this to me so quickly. Dock 2, you said? Oh, yes. It's one of the large containers, and Dock 2 is the only one with space right now. The steward nodded. And Jaxmi found herself nodding along.
Miss, if you don't mind, I need to get back to the driver. Of course.
Jacksme bowed her head respectfully. Stewards weren't nobles, but they were adults after all.
Thank you for your time and troubles.
A moment after the door closed, Mel stepped over.
Jax, are you all right? You look a bit pale.
Jax could barely breathe as she paged down through the shipping manifest. It was from Earth. There was an attachment at the bottom. Jacksme quickly thumbed it open and read. Dearest Jacksme, you are taking after your uncle in more ways than one. Getting in over your head is one of the key things you will have to learn about, and it's good to start early. I am sending you a dozen bolts of silk. Fabric is sold on Earth in a quantity called a bolt, which is about 91.5 meters in assorted colors. You can return the money to your mothers. 6,000 credits is a lot, but it's nowhere near what good quality silk costs in quantity. Each of the bolts I am sending cost about 8,000 credits each. I am fronting the material cost to you in exchange for a 30% stake in your coming business ventures. I trust you will find it acceptable. I suggest you find a tailor on Shill from a good family and work with them. When you're dealing with high-quality materials, one of the worst things you can do is skimp on the manufacture. Trying to pinch pennies, as the humans say, is a shortcut to failure. Speaking of humans, I have one last thing to tell you. As you know, I have been working with them extensively here on Earth, and much of our family's recent success is due to our business ventures taken with this strange species. My advice for you is this: do not underestimate them. Always assume that the humans you are dealing with are smarter than you are and plan accordingly. Better to be pleasantly surprised to find yourself ahead than to try to take advantage of one and have everything come tumbling down. Even the dumb ones have a sort of cunning, and if your new teacher has made it to Shill, they're definitely not one of the dumb ones. Love, always. Jimsy Chelkser. End of the second day. It's very important to get all the way to the end of the lesson. Check your time because it's about the implications of physical proximity by your third date. And I wouldn't like to leave that section hanging in the middle. Give... Oh, God. Oh, boy. Life is also more comfortable if you are a married woman, as it provides you with home cooking in her own...